Defense will come to order. This morning, the subcommittee will receive testimony and an update on the military service academies. We welcome our three witnesses, Lieutenant General Darryl Williams, Superintendent of West Point, Vice Admiral Ted Carter, Superintendent of the Naval Academy, and Lieutenant General J. Silveria, Superintendent of the Air Force Academy. Gentlemen, thank you very much for appearing today. We appreciate you being able to share the current state of the military academies. Additionally, on behalf of all the members, want to thank you for changing the date of your testimony given the cancellation of votes yesterday. We do appreciate very much you staying over. Some of the topics for today's hearings that I hope we can hear more about include the mission structure and academics at each of the service academies and how our academies are reflecting the national defense strategy. A discussion of maintenance and restoration efforts of buildings and facilities at each location, West Point and the Naval Academy that have buildings over 100 years old, and the Air Force Academy whose buildings are all roughly the same age as the institution. And some of the social issues each academy is dealing with, notably sexual assault and harassment, and what way is forward. We also look forward to hearing what more we as members of Congress can do to help the service academies in the nomination process. With that, again, I thank you again for appearing before the committee today to discuss these issues. And now I would like to recognize my friend and distinguished ranking member, Mr. Calver, for any comments he has.
Thank you, Chairman Visclosky, and welcome to our witnesses. I look forward to hearing from each of you. As you know, every member of Congress has the ability to nominate promising young men and women to each of your academies. It's an honor to be accepted to your institutions. Each has a long and honorable history of graduates who go on to serve our country with distinction. I take my responsibility in the nominating process very seriously and convene a committee of retired service members to interview candidates, assist me in the selection process. One of my West Point appointees was First Lieutenant Todd Bryant. Todd was from Riverside, California, was 23 when he was killed in action in the Iraq War. He'd been there for about 2 months. Todd was married shortly before he shipped out, also interned in my office. He joked he would run for my seat one day. The loss of Todd is a reminder of the solemn duty we have in nominating young people to the academies and providing for them after they graduate and begin service in their respective branch. The young men and women who attend your institutions are, by and large, our future leaders. I look forward to hearing about the condition of your facilities, your curriculum to ensure we are training the next generation of officers to meet the national security challenges we face. I also understand we're going to hear from you about the recent report on sexual assaults. The young men and women at your academies are held to high standards, as they should be. I look forward to hearing from you about how you plan to address those concerns. Again, I appreciate your years of dedicated public service to our nation, and I look forward to your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, your full written testimonies will be placed in the record, and members have copies at their seats. My intention is to allow members multiple rounds for possible questions, and therefore, in the interest of time, I would strongly encourage each of you to keep your summarized statements to about 5 minutes. Also, would strongly encourage you to be complete in your answers, but very concise, so members can have multiple questions per round. With that, we will begin with General Williams and move from left to right from your shoulders.
Chairman Visclosky, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the state of the United States Military Academy. And on behalf of the entire West Point team, thank you for your support to the Academy and our programs. West Point continues to develop smart and thoughtful leaders of character who will fight and win in the crucible of ground combat, and who are prepared to lead in this complex age of persistent conflict. We expect our graduates to live honorably, lead honorably, and demonstrate excellence. To move the Academy forward in concert with the Army's priorities, we've developed 5 priorities that focus our efforts and enable us to achieve our mission. Developing leaders of character, strengthening the culture of character, building our team of cadets, staff, faculty, and coaches, modernizing, securing, and reforming West Point, and strengthening our partnerships with the Army, Department of Defense, allies and partners, the civilian sector, academia, and of course, the American people. These efforts posture the Academy to best support Army readiness and modernization and enable the long-term development of leaders with the high standards our nation deserves from the profession of arms. While the vast majority of our cadets and graduates exemplify true leaders of character, recent survey results on sexual assault and sexual harassment remind us that our work will never truly be completed. I can assure you that we are determined, vigilant, and committed to addressing this problem and to meeting the American public's expectations for honorable service. We must eradicate sexual assault and sexual harassment at West Point. Critical to our success in achieving these efforts are the Academy's three greatest strengths: the outstanding young men and women who comprise the Corps of Cadets, the dedicated and talented military and civilian professionals who make up our team of staff, faculty, and coaches, and most importantly, our Army values and the West Point ideals of duty, honor, and country. We are confident that we are on the right path to best support the Army and the national defense strategies by graduating the leaders of character who are comfortable with complexity and who are ready to deploy, fight, and win when and where required. Of course, we continue to measure our success in the thousands of West Point graduates who serve and lead with distinction in the Army, industry, and government throughout the nation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I invite you to visit West Point to see firsthand our amazing cadets, staff, faculty, and coaches. I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the United States Naval Academy. Our mission is to develop midshipmen morally, mentally, and physically, and to imbue them with the highest ideals of duty, honor, and loyalty. I am pleased to report to you that the Naval Academy is succeeding in its mission, and in no small part due to the support of Congress. This past summer, we graduated over 1,000 members of the class of 2018. 75% were commissioned into the United States Navy as ensigns, where the vast majority will serve as surface warfare officers, submariners, aviators, Navy SEALs, and explosive ordnance disposal officers. 25% were commissioned as second lieutenants in the Marine Corps. Feedback from the fleet, as in past years, is that the Naval Academy is producing junior officers with the skills necessary to successfully lead sailors and Marines. Thanks to the dedicated missions outreach efforts and your support, the brigade consists of midshipmen from every state and every district in our union, increasingly representing the nation it is sworn to protect and defend. Moreover, the brigade of midshipmen is comprised of 28% female and 36% minority midshipmen. The brigade is the most diverse it has been in the Naval Academy's 173-year history, and they are excelling, with a record high 90% of the original class of 2019 on track to graduate this May. The Naval Academy's rigorous academic program ranks as one of the best undergraduate programs in the country, due largely to an incredible faculty that continues to innovate their curricula to better prepare our future warfighters. This past summer, our two most recently added majors, nuclear engineering and cyber operations, were fully accredited, with cyber as one of only 4 accredited programs in the entire nation. While I'm proud of the accomplishments of our faculty, staff, coaches, and most importantly, the Brigade of Midshipmen, I do have concerns. Despite dedicated efforts by the Naval Academy leadership and the brigade, we continue to experience incidents of unwanted sexual contact within our ranks. I and the rest of my leadership team have actively sought out professional advice from the experts on the best strategies to reduce this scourge within our student body, and we've implemented initiatives to drive improvements. We must do better. I'm also troubled with the current state of the Naval Academy's infrastructure. Stemming from highly pressurized budgets as a result of the 2013 sequestration, the Department of the Navy has taken risk by underfunding capital investments in installation operations in order to fund other critical warfighting readiness and modernization requirements. Fortunately, the Naval Academy has recently experienced increased levels of funding for infrastructure sustainment and modernization, which are providing welcome relief. While I'm concerned with the ability to maintain this national historic landmark, I am committed to ensuring that the safety, security, and quality of the working, learning, and living environment is sustained well into the future. Thank you for your time today. I am prepared to address your questions.
Thank you very much. General Silveria, please.
Chairman Veslosky, Ranking Member Calvert, and other distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to provide updates on the current events, successes, and challenges at the United States Air Force Academy. I appreciate your interest in the military service academies, institutions I'm confident all three superintendents here would agree play a vital role in reinforcing the strength and effectiveness of our services and in shaping the future of our military and the modern profession of arms. As Superintendent of the Air Force Academy, I am here on behalf of our 4,281 cadets and 203 preparatory school cadet candidates, as well as the faculty and staff that are developing them into the future leaders of our Air Force. I tell our cadets that they will soon graduate and stand beside me in uniform, and before long they will replace me. It will be their responsibility to guide our Air Force and make it their own. We need our cadets to be more creative, innovative, and inquisitive than ever before. We need them to look at the application of air power differently and to broaden that consideration of capability with their rapidly advancing knowledge in space, cyber, remotely piloted aircraft, and beyond. Through that lens, our service academies are an incredibly important investment in the future of our national security. In the more than 33 years I've had the privilege to wear this uniform since my graduation, our academy and our military have changed quite a bit, but our mission has not, and neither has our enduring dedication to our core values. My priority as superintendent, reinforce that dedication as we prepare agile leaders for a rapidly changing future. To that end, our priority must be to develop leaders of airmen who are innovative, who are rooted in a warrior ethos, and possess impeccable character. A culture of dignity and respect is foundational to the priorities I have just mentioned and everything we do at our academy. In this hearing, we will discuss areas of misconduct that demonstrate a severe lack of dignity and respect and have no place at our academies and in our military: sexual harassment and sexual assault. We are committed to addressing these issues head-on to be an example for our Air Force, Department of Defense, and society. In short, we must do more. Our society is changing swiftly, and we must lead these developments. Our newest class at the Academy included our highest percentage of women applicants, and we expect the class of 23 to be even higher. This year, we accepted the highest number of minorities into the class of 2022 in our history. We are not done on this front, and will continually strive to improve these numbers so that our academy more closely reflects the society it serves and possesses the greatest strengths of the diversity of that society. In nearly every interaction I have with our cadets, I am struck by their ambition, their intellect, their drive to become outstanding leaders. They are participating in a program built on 4 pillars of academics, military training, athletics, and character development. This year we have 2 Rhodes Scholars. Our research programs continue to be among the top in the country. Our cadets fly airplanes, operate remotely piloted aircraft, they operate satellites, and they operate in cyberspace. Our military training program is a rigorous 47-month experience that prepares cadets to be leaders of airmen. Every one of our cadets is an athlete. 1/4 compete against the best of the country in Division I athletics. And through character development, they are building a foundation of moral excellence that will guide them throughout their careers. I can tell you from my personal experience that modern combat is rapidly changing and will continue to be more complex. But one of the privileges of this role is that I get to see the future of our Air Force in our cadets. I encourage each of you to visit our academy, and I am confident that you will agree that these cadets are nothing short of incredible. They are up to this task, and it is our responsibility as leaders to ensure they are prepared to actively shape that future. The national security of our next generation depends on the investment we are making in these promising young leaders now. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
wonderful precedent for all of future witnesses for the next 2 years. I also, before I turn to Mr. Calver for any questions he may have, thank Mr. Womack because we are a collegial body, and it was Mr. Womack's suggestion that we hold this hearing today, and I thank him for that very good idea. With that, I turn to Mr. Calver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a statement and ask a question. I would like to say a quick note on the issue of sexual harassment, sexual assault at the academies. I know several of my colleagues will be covering this topic in their questions, and I want to give them the opportunity to do that. I'd just like to say that we hold our public institutions, especially the military, to a higher standards. All cadets, especially female cadets, must be made to feel safe and free from any kind of harassment or assault. And I certainly appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and action plans with both myself and Chairman Wisłowski prior to these hearings. For the well-being of our young people at the academies, we will hold you to your word to continue to account for the problem and find solutions. However, the question I'd like you to address is how the National Defense Strategy, which calls for a shift away from counterinsurgency to focus more on China and Russia, has impacted your training and education curriculum. As our adversaries become more adept at operating in the gray zone, cyber attacks, proxy wars, information warfare, how are we preparing our future leaders to fight and win in this new type of conflict?
Ranking Member, thank you very much for your question. The defense strategy that the Secretary of Defense asked us to have a more lethal force, and my Army leadership has asked me to focus on readiness. So readiness is the #1 priority of the United States Military Academy, and we do that through our leadership development strategy. We get at that through living honorably, leading honorably, and demonstrate excellence. So the cadets, my friends talked about the different pillars. Those same pillars exist at West Point. We have an academic pillar, a military pillar, a physical pillar, but the most important piece, as was mentioned earlier, was character. And so all 4 of those pillars work together. Our cadets in their curriculum are allowed to travel and see what the environments they're potentially going to be in. We have an academic enrichment program where cadets can travel abroad and understand future environments and understand future allies that they're going to partner with. We also have a variety of languages that we speak, that we teach at West Point, whether it be from Portuguese to Russian, where cadets are exposed firsthand to the environment they're going to be in. I would also say that cyber is a very important future aspect of this new environment, this multi-domain operations battlefield that we're going to fight in. So we have a real strong effort in cyber operations. We have 25 cadets who will branch this year, both male and female cadets, in the cyber operations.
Sir, I'll echo some of the comments of my colleague from West Point in that we have international programs and we are creating leaders of character that will make a difference for our Navy and Marine Corps. A couple of additional points. The academic curricula that we have at the Naval Academy is developed based on the needs of the fleet. When we graduate our young men and women that go into the Navy at 75%, 25% of the Marine Corps, as you heard me say in my opening statement, they go into warfighting roles. Roughly 95% of our graduates are in those warfighter roles. However, in this developing need, especially in the cyber sphere and intelligence, our number of commissioned officers have grown in that community. This year, we will commission 49 ensigns into the information warfare community, 24 of whom will be cryptologic warfare or cyber warriors. This is a shift based on the needs of the Navy, and it's also reflective of the curricula that we have at the Naval Academy. I mentioned the development of a cyber operations major, the development of a nuclear engineering major, operations research, an economics major that had been part of our liberal arts portion of our academy. Now it is a STEM-based major. So with 25 different academic majors to offer, 20 of them are in the STEM field, and we feel that is the type of technological background, engineering background that our young men and women will need to lead, fight, and win in the future.
Sir, thank you for the question and the opportunity. I'll add that the Air Force Academy, similar to the other two academies, very robust in our international programs. We think that cultural awareness, as in the National Defense Strategy, the importance of partnerships and alliances is crucial. And so we all have very robust international programs that can develop on that cultural awareness and the language awareness. I think for us in the area of technology advancement, we are consistently among the top research institutions in the country. And when you consider that we're an undergrad-only institution, we recently had 6 cadets that were awarded patents for their work, and one recently in the area of cyber. We focused a lot of our cadet for seniors in their curriculum in the area of research, so they have an experiential program. I point that out because that's where we get the innovative critical thinking skills to take on the National Defense Strategy and take on future conflicts that we're going to need. In the area of cyber and artificial intelligence, our cadets continue to do research and continue to stretch those technologies. But just as my colleagues have mentioned, we also this year have the highest number of cadets that are graduating into our space field, into our cyber field, and into our remotely piloted aircraft field than we've ever had in the past. That really shows the leading edge of technology and what we'll need in modern combat.
Thank you. Just real quick follow-up, because you brought that up. When you file a student files a patent, does that accrue to the benefit of the student, or does that accrue to the benefit of the institution?
Sir, the ones we have now are all intellectual property that the cadets have earned. We recently had a cadet just earn one in the area of cyber, a cadet, but it's his intellectual property.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. McCollum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to touch on, because I think we're going to have another round of questions, on the sexual assault. The report that just came out, and I looked at it again last night, and I have it in front of me, the Department of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office indicated that nearly 50% increase in unwanted sexual contact across the academies since 2016. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, but I want to take a couple of words right out of the report. One thing that, and these are not your words, gentlemen, these are from the Pentagon. I'm trying to read and talk at the same time. This is from the executive summary of the report. It's from page 5. And the second to the last paragraph disturbs me with the choosing of the words of the Pentagon in this report. Fewer cadets and midshipmen chose to make sexual harassment complaints this year than last. Chose. That means they decided to do or not to do. This shouldn't be a choice. This should be something that is reported when it happens, because when I read the word choose, that means someone still might be out there worried about a black mark, a stain on their record, not being taken seriously in that. But these were not your words, gentlemen. These were the words of the Pentagon. So I'm going to follow up with why they chose that word, because I find that very interesting, and words are very powerful. And when people write executive summaries, to drill down on this word again, they choose their words very carefully. The other thing that's in the report, and we talked about it a little bit, and sir, I'm sorry I didn't get to hear directly from the Air Force. It was no one's fault, it was weather. But we, in our conversations, you touched on alcohol. And one of the things in the report says U.S. Military Academy, alcohol is estimated to be involved in over half of the unwanted sexual contact events specifically. 52% events described by female cadets, 59 by male cadets. The Naval Academy, alcohol is estimated to be involved in over half of the unwanted sexual contact specifically. 72% of the described by female shipmen, 49 by male shipmen. The Air Force Academy, same number, same thing again on alcohol. 65% described by female cadets, I think it's supposed to say dualies, isn't it? If it's, or is that just first term? That's just the first term, cadets. And 62% by male cadets. So we did talk a little bit about culture, character, and alcohol, and some of the training that's been going on. Seeing the alcohol number, especially the number for the Navy, I have to say is fairly alarming. And we discussed it briefly. So I'm going to ask you to kind of tell us what tools that you need to put in your toolbox, or what kind of things that you expect will be happening to address these alarming trends and reports that continue to have numbers that are fairly active. And, you know, what are you going to do to address some of the root causes? And we're seeing alcohol is definitely one of them for sexual contact and harassment in the academies. And, you know, I know that these are young adults. I know that this happens on our college campuses, but we all talked about the character and the future leaders that these people are going to be or have expressed an interest in being. Could you maybe just give us some thoughts on that? Thank you.
Ma'am, I'm the longest-serving superintendent here on this panel, so I'll go first. I'd like to just briefly mention this key word that you hit on, which is chose in the reporting part. For us at the Naval Academy, if we were to look at these surveys that have been going on for well over a decade, from 2005 to 2007 to 2015, our reporting had shown steady increase, which is something that we saw as a positive, that we would see more of our survivors coming forward. We cannot force them to report. It's a voluntary thing that they will report. Our job is to set the culture and the conditions so they feel very comfortable and safe in reporting without any retaliation or any other pressures. We've done a significant amount of work to try to ease that burden. We've moved the response coordinators and the victim counselors away from the dorm rooms or Bancroft Hall where all the midshipmen live, so they can feel that sense that they can go somewhere to have that talk. They also know of other resources that are on the Naval Academy to help advise and assist them, from our chaplains to a place that's called the Midshipman Development Center for Mental Health. This is really about getting people to make that report. As you know, there are two types of report: a restricted report, where somebody files that report to get that type of service available to them, where there is no names involved, and then an unrestricted report. So these are the DoD rules that we operate within. And this is part of the challenge of holding people accountable. It's difficult to hold anybody accountable when a victim chooses not to participate in an investigation or move through the entire UCMJ process or file a report at all. As you also know, unwanted sexual contact is not always a physical assault. It is a wide range of that type of behavior.
I don't mean to be rude. I know the definitions well.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, especially laying out the case for alcohol.
Right.
What are you going to do?
So alcohol, for us at the Naval Academy, I view as one of the principal root causes of the elements of sexual assault. As you mentioned, 72% of our unwanted sexual contacts had alcohol involved. We have been working on this for a year, more so than we ever have this past year. We stood up a task force that went after this, directed to the midshipmen. The senior class, the class of 2019, has also taken this on and developing a Guardian Angel program that is out in town with the midshipmen. For many of the other members, you know, the city of Annapolis and our Naval Academy are co-joined, so midshipmen walk directly into town. And getting after this is the most important part. We have gone after significant effort this year, and we've seen a 49% reduction in alcohol-related incidents in just this year with some of these programs that are going forward. And of course, holding Naval Academy midshipmen accountable for misuse and abuse of alcohol. So all of that is part of getting after that to reduce alcohol use and misuse. That's part of the campaign to reduce the scourge.
Ma'am, I'll add from the Air Force Academy some specific steps that we've taken in the area of alcohol. That watching this last year, we also added some increased supervision, and we've also added very similar programs as Admiral Carter mentions, the Guardian Angels, where the cadets are responsible and also participating in the supervision. And then our AOCs, our commanders that are with the cadets, they are also, we've increased the supervision in areas where there are alcohol so that it's more visible. And then most directly, what we've initiated is an education program for all of our third classmen, which is the second year. As they approach drinking age, mostly in that year, we initiated an education program that is a lot more focused on the prevention aspect and the effects of alcohol and the prevention. So those are two specific things that we've done directly at the Air Force Academy recently.
Ma'am, we have 273 young men and women who had the courage to come forward and talk to me and say, I was sexually abused in this space. We take that seriously. This is our family. These are our sons and daughters. And so with respect to alcohol, your specific question, we're doing a lot, but we have not done enough. Next, on the 25th of this month, we're doing a stand down across our academy. There'll be no classes. There'll be no sports. The entire community will come together and revisit where we are. Right now, my commandant, as I'm here, is reviewing all of our policies. We're reviewing how long we keep places where cadets can have access to alcohol. Is that too much? My sense is that it is. And so we're reviewing everything we're doing in this space. There are current policies and procedures but they're not working. So we need to fix it. And we will, starting on the 25th with a stand down. Coaches, instructors, tactical officers, cadets will come together and talk about how we're going to go forward in this space.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chair, I think we need to request what the alcohol policies and disciplines are for all three academies. It should be the same across all three, in my opinion. You know, what really are the consequences? Because all of you also mentioned your collegiate athletic programs, too. And we know that our colleges, some of them have taken drug and alcohol abuse very, very seriously for scholarships. So I'd like to know what's happening in that realm. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Womack's next, but if I could, if there's other members that have a question on this area, my suggestion is we stay focused, and I'd be happy to recognize people who have questions in the area. And Steve, if you do. Judge?
I'm from a time when I went to school when men and women didn't live in the same dormitories. We had curfews at the school I went to. Studies show that the highest consumption of alcohol for any age group is college-age kids. I don't think anybody will argue with that. In fact, binge drinking originates in colleges and universities. You each have an honor system, which is something to be extremely proud of, because part of our military is their honor. We as a general public couldn't pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, because there's a whole lot of us in the civilian world that don't have a sacred honor. But you do, and that's the standard I think we're trying to reach, is that sacred honor. But I also know, if anybody knows what the reporting from, pick one, University of Texas at Austin or Texas Tech University in Lubbock, went to both schools, what the reporting of sexual assault and sexual abuse and sexual violations are at civilian schools versus military schools. So the use of the word choose, I can understand the attitude should be everybody should be reporting all this stuff and officers should be in charge. But now the real world, I talked to my Army fellow. I'm talking about West Point now, but I assume you're all the same. You house by company level, right? Men and women are in the company, and you have commanders, we have people like at the captain level, basically, that oversee these people in the Army. But they're not there 24 hours a day. In fact, you don't want them there 24 hours a day. But when they are there, cadets are not going to behave, because it's a military environment, when the officer is there like they would behave when the officer's not there. And so you can't really lay it off on the captain in charge of the company. He may be seeing perfect behavior while he's there because he's the man in charge or the woman in charge. So how do you get around the culture of the military? Because we would assume, like if I was at dorm, we had I won't use the term we had for the guy who checked on us as a freshman and sophomore. And we behaved when he was around, and we didn't behave when he was not around, and I'll confess to that. How do we fix that in the military? Because it's magnified, and so you can't lay the blame on the officer. He won't see these things happening while he's there. They will happen while he's not there. So I guess that's confusing, but there's so much goes on colleges, campuses right now, it's unbelievable. But yet we're holding you to a standard of honor. And how do we reach that? I don't know the answer.
Sir, thank you. First, I'd say that all three of us feel the same way, that we don't know the same kind of numbers that is presented in the report that's referenced at other universities. I mean, no one else is taking the time to be as open and transparent and as surveying as specifically at other universities as we are, and we proudly do that, and we want to be open and transparent about it. But at the same time, the reason is because we hold ourselves to that higher standard that you mentioned. So we are not exactly sure what other universities see, but frankly, sir, we're gonna continue to hold ourselves to the highest of standards because the nation expects that, and you expect that of us. Our responsibility that we have to do more of is work on that culture of accountability, so that we all have leadership laboratories. The idea that senior, that first classman that is about to be a lieutenant in the United States Air Force is responsible for what's going on in that space, in that company, in that squadron. So we need to work on a culture of accountability. And I will give you one specific at the United States Air Force Academy, that my responsibility, first and foremost, is the safety and security of these young men and women, my responsibility to you, the nation, to their parents, and to them. So we've installed thousands of closed-circuit TV cameras throughout our dorms for safety and security. As we know, there have been a number of incidents at other universities, and we need to protect them. So that's one direct action that we've taken lately.
Sir, women have been at the Naval Academy since 1976, as they have been in all of our service academies, and from day one, we're in Bancroft Hall, where all the brigade and midshipmen live. We have been intermingled, in other words, meaning from one room to another, it could be a woman's room or a man's room. The culture of how we live inside Bancroft Hall today is actually, through this anonymous survey, says that the problems of assault are not occurring inside Bancroft Hall. And I'd like to think that we've created that culture in there that is similar to being on a Navy ship, which is a very enclosed, small space where you have men and women now work together. But this, to your point, keeping the eye on midshipmen so they understand that their life and their daily work when they're in uniform, which happens from very early in the morning till taps at night, doesn't end. They're also midshipmen when they're on liberty, they're on overseas travel, or doing summer training. And that's been a theme that we have to constantly work on, because for us at the Naval Academy, that's where the majority of these unwanted sexual contact events have occurred.
Congressman, there are two chains of command in the barracks, as you accurately depicted. It's the company commander who's returned. We send them to a college. They get a degree in organizational theory, and they practice the skills they learned, both practitioner from being a combat infantryman, and then they have the theoretical skills to use that in action. My expectation is that when these company tactical officers, and there's also a great non-commissioned officer with these company tags, that the cadet chain of command take charge at night, and they hold each other accountable in that space until that captain or sergeant are there. So it's two chains of commands that own this. It's just not the tax as you accurately depicted. I expect the cadets to hold each other. It's called stewardship. I expect them to own this along with their tax, and if they have questions, that's what I expect out of our cadets.
Just quickly, kind of more of a statement. I'm served on the Naval Academy board for at least 12 years, and I know that, Mr. Womack is on the West Point board, and from the time I got on that board, this was always an issue. Every year the board would get, and I appreciate the openness to the board, that there would be incidents involving sexual harassment or sexual assault. And then we would get reports on our board meetings about what we were doing about it. I would say each superintendent tried to do the best, but I think Admiral Carter has been extremely aggressive. And it's not only about dealing with it after it happens, it's trying to set the culture before it even happens. And I think that culture, and you talked about Bancroft Hall, where you have men and women, the whole, everyone lives in that one hall. And there haven't been that many incidents there. So it's something we're going to continue to deal with. You have young, immature students that come in their first year, and every college issue has it. But we are training our future leaders of tomorrow. We are the strongest country in the world, I believe. One of the reasons because of our military academies. So we have to have honor, we have to have discipline, and I think part of it too is not just leadership, you doing it, but the people in the four-year students that go through that have to create that culture and work with the freshmen, especially as they come in. And I don't need an answer.
If I could, just two quick points I want to get to Mr. Womack. One, General Silveria, when we talked, you mentioned that for cadets who bring forth a complaint, you have a personal conversation with them after the fact, and I found it interesting, and all of you have referred to culture. Of course, we have a societal culture. You indicated the act itself, obviously, is horrific, but it's the jokes, it's the innuendo, it's the other stuff, and I assume as you proceed, that's part of that educational. Listen, we got to respect each other. We can't do that anymore. But I appreciate you do that. The quick question, just kind of yes and no, in the conversations Mr. Calvert and I had with you before, it appears that the military academy, sophomore women and men are more likely to report. In the Navy, a sophomore women and men more likely. Air Force, sophomore and junior women more likely. Is there that bulge, and do the complaints recede in that junior and senior year from your experience? Just kind of yes and no.
For the sophomore year, the yearling year for West Point, yes, sir. There is more of a, of the four-year experience, the sophomores seem to be reporting more and be more at risk in this space. Yes.
Same at Navy.
Sir, that is normally the case. In this year's survey at the Air Force Academy, we saw the increase in what was then the junior class that was taken in when this survey was taken, which is now our senior class, the class of 2019. So when the survey was taken, they were juniors, and that was where we saw the biggest increase.
Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding the hearing. As I have told my colleagues around this dais, that I think because all of us have vetting processes of some type to send our best and brightest young men and women to these academies, a very prestigious honor, that it deserves to have the superintendents of these institutions down here at least on an every other year basis so that we can have this interaction. And my question is more of a help us, help you sort of question, and it's related primarily in part to the fact that we've had much more gender integration in the last several years, and there has been an increasing need to try to match the leadership of our institutions with the rank and file on the enlisted side, and I think we still have a ways to go to be able to make sure that we've got that proper mix. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody here, all these members of Congress who have a bazillion other things going on, have to take time out to roam these halls of these high schools to try to figure out who these people are. But General Silveria, you said, and I know because of my relationship to West Point, that this past year, class of 22, we had, I think, I'll get these mixed up, but either the highest percentage of African Americans in that class, on one hand, and maybe the second highest of females, and I may have those reversed, but very, very high percentages. And you had indicated the same. How are we doing, and what can we do better to make sure that we're filling the needs of our services from this gender and minority integration standpoint? And I'll give each one of you a chance to respond.
Sir, thank you for the question. The first thing I would tell you is in our application process, we are seeing a rise in female applications, even though we're at the highest percentage we've ever been at 28%, and minority applications. As I mentioned, we're at 36% minorities at the Naval Academy today, and that happens because of our outreach, but there's no question it happens because of the work of you and your staffs who help us and direct us to those locations within your districts to where we can get into the high schools and have our midshipmen visit them, which we do. We touched over 50,000 high schoolers and youth last year through our outreach program where we have midshipmen visit various high schools. But maybe more to the point is how well are these cohorts, whether it be through the women being at the Naval Academy or the minorities. I have to tell you, we're seeing amazing talent that gets to us. This past year, minorities graduated at a higher rate than their white counterparts, first time in 173-year history. This year, women will graduate at a 92.4%, the highest of any cohort of any group within the Naval Academy. At 28% of women being at the Naval Academy, they hold 37% of the brigade leadership positions. So these are leading indicators that all of these cohorts are not just surviving, they're thriving. And I would just say thank you to all the members for bringing this type of talent to our academy.
Sir, thank you for the question. What I think that we need to do is that I think we as superintendents owe you better partnership with your staffs and better partnerships with your district staffs, because I think we can do better in outreach and working together to expand that outreach to women and to minority populations. Since we cannot solve how many women and minorities are in our population in the final admissions decision, we have to do it, as you pointed out, in the outreach. And so we're all seeing increases. We saw, as you pointed out, the class of 22, highest percentage of women applicants we had ever seen, 30%. And then this year for the class of 23, over 31%. So we're seeing those numbers increase. But I think the answer to your question, sir, is that I think we owe you a better partnership to work together in your districts to find those areas. Some members, Representative McCollum's district, I know, we have 20 cadets from her district. 3 of them are going to graduate this year. But there are districts within the House that are not represented near as well. So we need to do that better to partner with members.
General Williams.
Thank you, Congresswoman. 21st century operational environments are complex and require diverse solution sets. And I believe at United States Military Academy, our current, as you accurately depicted, 24.5% of our current population are women, 15.4% are African American, which exceed our Army percentages in officers for the Army. I absolutely think this is critical, and like my partner from the Naval Academy, they are highly represented, more represented as well in terms of, there's only 24.5% women at the Academy, but they hold 33.6% of the chain of command responsibility. So they're integrated. We've also had the opportunity to graduate 11 of the 22 current female Rangers in the United States Army have come from the United States Military Academy. So we're very, gender integration is very important to how we're going to solve problems in the future battlefield.
Good. I'll have other questions, but I'll yield back for the benefit of my colleagues.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm going to try to cover 2 topics if I can, but I wanted to start, Admiral Carter. I'm always amazed whenever I visit the naval base in my neck of the woods, just at the level of complexity, the high technology, not just on the submarines, but on all of the platforms that we depend on next generation engineers to work on. And I guess I wanted to get a sense from you how you feel the Naval Academy is positioned to train, recruit and train those next generation engineers. I also know, or I've heard about the new nuclear engineering program, and I thought if you could take a second and talk about why you developed that program and how those graduates will further the mission into the future.
Thank you, Congressman. As you point out, a STEM-based academic program at the Naval Academy is what's required to go serve in our complex and technical Navy today. Our Chief of Naval Operations directs us to produce 65% of our graduates that go in to be ensigns in the Navy to come from the STEM fields. We've been exceeding that for the last 5 years across all the ensigns that graduate. Now, granted, the Naval Academy curriculum is liberal arts based, but it's a minor in engineering for everyone from English majors to Chinese majors to, of course, mechanical engineers, and now our new majors that are in nuclear engineering. I would submit that all of our graduates can be ready to go into the nuclear engineering field. It's the strength of the overall curriculum. But the need to have detail, and what we have developed over the last couple of years is not just classroom education, but now immersive, capstone, experiential-based learning programs. These are now turning into projects where midshipmen are doing research with faculty members and coming up with new ideas for how to do things. So we've seen some great success there. I think we're very poised to continue to serve on nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and on nuclear-powered submarines based on the curriculum that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to just get a sense from any of you interested in weighing in on this is just getting a sense of what you're seeing in terms of differences between the past generations and the millennial generation. You know, if you're seeing any differences in terms of what makes millennials interested in serving our country, if you have observed any differences in what drives a millennial to seek an education at one of the academies, and any difference in terms of how you teach and train millennials?
Sure, it's a tough question, but thank you. I'll give a couple thoughts of what we see. I think what I see among the cadets that I spend time with is this remarkable interest in wanting to serve and wanting to make a difference. And some other indications are not just that these are 17-year-olds that are raising their right hand and showing up at the academies. I mean, we've seen highest numbers of community service hours in our local community that we've ever seen before. They're out and about really, truly wanting to make a difference. Recently, we signed a cadet that's going to show up who happens to be a recruited athlete. And in one of those things out of a 17-year-old that you just always wonder what makes them say that is that this young man was considered to be playing at a number of other universities across the country. And he said, it's not about the next 4 years, it's about the next 40 years I want to serve. And so we see that again and again within this generation.
Sir, I would just say as we're finishing the end of the millennial generation, we're actually now seeing the centennial generation that is in our ranks, and they are even slightly different. And I appreciate Jay's answer here, but this is a generation that values service, they value education, they've never not known anything but the high-speed internet. So we think about that, somebody that's coming into the Naval Academy West Point or the Air Force Academy, they're less affected by the events of 9/11 because they might have only been 1 or 2 years old, and they have never not had high-speed internet. So they're used to answers at their fingertip. Their thirst for learning and the ability to multitask is unlike anything we've ever seen. So regardless of how we want to talk about different generations, this new generation that's now coming into our ranks is exceptional, and it makes me very excited for the future.
That's great.
Thank you, Congressman. I've had the opportunity to not only be a cadet at West Point, but I went back as a captain. I was walking those halls at 3 o'clock in the morning watching my company. And then I came back as a lieutenant colonel and now as a superintendent. And I'm not so sure I could get in the United States Military Academy now. But they're fit, they're smart, they want to serve. And I've watched this, I've seen changes, as was mentioned earlier, an earlier question about the demographic. I've watched the demographic, the complexion of what West Point looks like right now. It looks differently than when I entered there in 1979, 1980. And I think it's because these cadets want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to win.
Terrific. Thanks. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. A lot was said about the issue of abuse, and I think that's obviously something that all of us, and I frankly appreciate the fact that you all have shown great commitment to that, and so I appreciate that. I will, Mr. Chairman, less than a question, really kind of a comment. So we work really hard and I have a person in my staff who works year-round to promote the academies. And she actually goes into the high schools. And then at Southcom, we have an Academy Day. And I will tell you that, just for you all know, the communication that my office has with the academies is phenomenal. I hear that from my folks all the time. The folks and we have usually, again, 100 or more folks that come to the Academy Day. But this is the comment I wanted to make. So I've had the privilege of having even some interns who then have gone to the academies, or folks that I've known. And it's an interesting thing to see. And so the transformation that occurs from, these are bright men and women, because for them to get into the academy, they have to have, frankly, they're pretty impressive human beings to start with. But I would just tell you, and so for you it's not a surprise, but I will tell you that to me it's still an amazing thing to see. And I tell this when I speak to parents out there, as we try to promote the academies, and I tell them I don't do this to promote the academies, I do it to help these individuals and to help the country. But you have these fine, patriotic, good students go into the academies as kids. And when they come out of there, not only are they highly educated and proficient, but you can see the change. And you can see the change immediately in that first year. So I just wanted to, again, less of a question and a comment, just to let you know that some of us, again, see, and there are no better institutions of learning in the world. But it's beyond just learning, it's this character building that you all do. So, as you heard from us from WOMAC as well, is what else can we do? Because obviously we heard about the effects of sequester that they've had to the academies, and so I'm hoping that we have opportunities now to be able to be very, very helpful. I don't think that there's a better investment in taxpayer money for the future of our country, our military, and also, frankly, for these individuals than what you all do. So thank you for what you do. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to get into some budget issues. I'm going to ask a question of Admiral Carter at this point, since I've been on that board and we do have briefings. And what I've seen in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, and probably a lot of it having to do with sequestration, that your operating budget has stayed flat. And yet you continue to have more expenses, and it just, sooner or later, something's going to hit, and it's not going to be positive. And it seems to me, and I'm also co-chair of the Army Caucus with Judge Carter, so we deal with General Milley on budgeting issues as far as West Point's concerned. I'm sorry I don't deal as much with the Air Force, but getting back to the issue, could you let us know how the increased costs and lack of funding are affecting your ability to do your mission and train our future leaders of tomorrow? Now, I know when you're in the military, it's yes, sir, no excuses, sir, and it's difficult for you sometimes to complain when this is, you get your number and that's it, but we're independent, and our job on the board and here is to make sure you get your resources. So let us know at this point where you are, how this lack of funding is affecting you, and how we need to improve it to make sure we continue the proficiency of these institutions. And then I'm going to get to capital after this.
Congressman, thanks for the question. As you know, at the Naval Academy, there are kind of two elements to this operating and maintenance budget. The first is what it costs for us to basically operate the Naval Academy. That's to pay for faculty, operate our training craft, and do travel and training for midshipmen. As you stated, we have been flat since really 2012, and sequestration made it difficult. So that's roughly about $141 million operating budget. of which now today nearly 77% of that is to take care of our civilian faculty and staff, and that's a workforce of about 2,000 people, military and civilian, that take care of the 4,400 midshipmen. So these are tough decisions that have to be made, but we're operating at about $14 million below where we probably should be.
14 million.
14 million below. That's just take care of the day-to-day business.
Well,
And
so-
we are, quite honestly, our own worst enemy. We have a great success in our graduation rate and our reputation, but over time, that will become problematic if we continue on that path.
But unfortunately, sometimes your budget coming from the Pentagon or the Naval office, you're the last, and you know, when you're looking for readiness and all of those issues, how has that impacted your ability to do your job?
The impact has been less people in doing lab technician work, certainly less, for example, our library has become somewhat stagnant. We barely have enough money to do magazine subscriptions and hold the type of quality library that we should have. But mostly it's in the hiring process. You know, we are limited by the number of people we can hire, and we're making it fit. We've added extra programs within that budget to include the cyber operations major, which we knew was needed. The entire sexual assault, sexual harassment team that we have, which is a clear priority, has also been embedded in that budget. So although it's remained flat, we're still able to do our mission. We're still been successful, but it's going to have further impact down the road if it's not.
Which is not a positive impact. And I assume the other academies have the same issue and the same problem.
Sir, if I could just add one other piece, that a lot of times we talk about infrastructure that perhaps that doesn't necessarily reflect one element, which is our information technology, that IT infrastructure. Okay. For us to deliver higher education in the 21st century, we've had to make significant investment in our IT infrastructure, and we're still short. So a lot of times we do talk about the buildings, and that's important in facilities, but the IT infrastructure is how we deliver 21st century
That's very important. Now, I know at the Naval Academy, you know, around 2005, none of the academies knew anything about cyber. And I think that's when I was on that board. And as a result of at least the Naval Academy, I think you worked with NSA, your leadership realized, and you built a new building. And it's one of the quickest majors that you've put in place since you've been there, and I assume the same is going on with all three now. But I'm going to get into the infrastructure issue real quick. Bancroft Hall, as an example. How old is Bancroft Hall?
So Bancroft Hall was built in 1903 as a 4-wing dormitory, and it was finished in 1961. An 8-wing dormitory covers 33 acres. All 4,400 midshipmen live there and eat there. Well,
on my role on the board, I've heard of all sorts of issues, health issues, fungi, and you know, all those things. And you know, you've got to take care of that. And I understand that that's a big issue too in a lot of the buildings, not just, even though we have one new cyber building. Could you tell me a little bit about your infrastructure problems and how far you're down on that also? Even though you've gotten a little money in the last couple of years, it's not enough. Could you explain that?
Yes, sir. To give you a snapshot, quick summary, we had a flagship agreement with the Department of the Navy that funds us through the Chief of Naval Personnel budget, and that was to fund us for sustainment maintenance as well as restoration maintenance for the infrastructure. There's another pot of money that takes care of basically mowing the grass and trimming the trees as a historical site that's visited by over 2 million people a year just to look at the Naval Academy. But since sequestration, the reduction in those cost levels have gone down. Funding since sequestration has been down more than 40%.
40%?
40%. So sustainment was reduced from 36 million to 26 million, and recapitalization was reduced from 35 million to 15 million, and we have gotten some relief. The RM, or recapitalization money, is now at an every other year of $15 million, so it gives us some predictability. But if you were to ask me right now, what do we need to be whole to get the Naval Academy, even though I have about $180 million worth of work between new construction and recapitalization going on today, so there is some relief. But going forward, that budget line will have to be adjusted by about $35 million a year to make us okay going forward. And this to include how we do maintenance on at least one wing in Bancroft Hall every year.
Well, leadership's extremely important, and I think it's really important for this committee to be aware of these numbers and how it seems you're at the end of the line when it comes to money recently. And I think it's this committee's obligation to really look into these numbers at all three of the academies, whether it's operation or whether it's capital, because if we don't have the leadership that is coming out of these academies and we don't take care of it, we're going to start to suffer. And you know the threats, the world threats we have, Russia, China, and all of these other issues.
Mr. Womack?
I would argue that if the institutions are so incredibly important that people around this dais would nominate their best and brightest young men and women to go there, that they deserve to not be neglected from a recapitalization standpoint. I just wanted to give a quick moment for General Williams because of my relationship to the board there and what I know about a place called Camp Buckner, that if you've never been there, you need to go. I would argue that that's the place where the military component of what we're doing for these young men and women at West Point is actually taking place. Give us a quick depiction of Camp Buckner and why it needs attention.
Congressman, thank you. First, let me thank you for all of the support you provided us in the past. I work very closely with our Army leadership, and what we require is sustained, predictable funding over the long haul, and that's why Camp Buckner. I will tell you that our FSRM, our sustainment and renovation and maintenance, has been very, very well. We worked very closely with our Army leadership, and we feel pretty comfortable in our ability to maintain our facilities. The West Point Military Complex, Camp Buckner, is where we do our military training. So this sophomore group that we talked about earlier, our yearlings, that's where they spend their summer training. It really is vital to the in military in the United States Military Academy. As I mentioned, the academic pillar, the physical pillar, but where the cadets do military things in the summer. After their first year as freshmen or plebes, this is their first introduction to how we do things in the military and move on towards the crucible of ground combat. It needs work. We have 410 structures on West Point. Most of those structures are Q3 and Q4, and many of those structures are out at Camp Buckner. It's Camp Buckner, but equally important is Camp Natural Bridge, where we bring in real soldiers from the Army to come in and partner with the yearlings in that summer. So there is the infrastructure required out there needs some work at Camp Buckner.
Mr. Aguilar, and then Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to revisit on kind of the curriculum issue that Mr. Kilmer and Mr. Ruppersberger mentioned a little bit. Specifically, we've all read the open source documents on our threats assessment, and you spoke about cyber in your comments as well. But specifically related to that, what challenges do we have in growing and maintaining these programs? This is something obviously that didn't exist from a curriculum standpoint years ago. So how do we prepare for that? What types of research and extracurricular activities can individuals take related to the cyber field?
So we started our journey into cyber curriculum dating back prior to 2010, as Congressman Ruppersberger alluded to. Today, over that period of time, we have mandatory courses for our freshmen and our junior. We're one of the few, if not the only school in the country that has that, because we think everybody baseline, whether an aviator, Navy SEAL, needs to have understanding in this important domain. The academic major is only now in its 4th year. It was developed over time. As you can imagine, there are not a lot of PhDs out there in our country that are educated in cyber, so we mostly recruit practitioners from places like the National Security Agency to come and teach at the Naval Academy. The desire to get into this field is remarkable. I mentioned we have 25 academic majors today. Last year's class graduated with 22 cyber operations majors. The sophomore class, the year they picked their majors this year, started at 110 cyber operations majors. Roughly 1/10 of the whole class is in one major. It's the 5th most popular major at the Naval Academy. So our midshipmen get it. There are a tremendous amount of activities for them to do, and whether they're a cyber operations major or not. The National Security Agency runs a contest every year, a war game, if you will, between the service academies to include Coast Guard and our Canadian friends. And it is a combination of capture the flag, moving data around, intruding our networks, and the cadets and midshipmen have to identify those and put patches on those. It's remarkable work, and sometimes we've been asked to go brief the Pentagon on what they've learned from those exercises. Our midshipmen are also involved in policy contests. New York University has one of the top in the country, and they go internationally, and they compete very, very well. So this is a big topic at the Naval Academy. And to end the conversation, thanks to the members of Congress, in 2016, we received $120 million to build probably the last major academic building on our 338-acre campus, Hopper Hall. It's just about getting ready to be framed out. It'll be operational in 2020. It will be where all the cyber operations education will happen. And embedded in this is a sensitive compartmented information facility where we can teach at the classified level, something we've never had at the Naval Academy. So this is the cyber field of dreams. This is the future. And we are attracting a lot of great talent from all over the country because they know that we have this capability to teach.
Sir, I'll add that we're also very much in this space, in that we're a Cyber Innovation Center. We'll be breaking ground on our new facility later this year. We're also uniquely placed in Colorado Springs to have ability to partner with the National Cybersecurity Center, Air Force Space Command that's in Colorado Springs, and U.S. Space Command that's standing up. So we benefit from that greatly in the area. I'll also point out that you mentioned the research, and so we have one of the 3 cyber cities that are in the United States where cadets can hack into the cities and to function around in cyberspace to hone their skills and practice their skills and work their research. But also, sir, it has to be also about getting into the high schools. There are so many cyber competitions now that go on around the United States, and that's really a growing element. We all went through the years as the robotics competitions continue to grow and we seek out those want-to-be engineers. Well, now we have an opportunity as the cyber competitions are growing to get out and find those want-to-be cyber warriors. Because it's not just about computer science. It's an important element here. It's about teaching cadets that are ready to fight and defend in cyberspace, which is very different. And so we're all taking that on. We're all taking that on up front and directly.
General. It's important that we fight and win in this domain. The cyber domain is absolutely critical to the land domain, to the air, and our maritime brothers and sisters. We have 25 young men and women. They're hand-selected who are going to join the cyber branch this summer. They'll commission in a few months. The folks who are responsible, they come to West Point, they recruit these folks. They're our best cadets. They're physically fit, they're smart, they think critically. It's very important that they have those skills in this space. We also have the opportunity, the Army's been very gracious to me. We've got the Army Cyber Institute, which is right outside of our gate, and the cadets get to practice real time the things they learn in the classroom with the Army Cyber. We hold a big conference every year. Our cadets and cadre put that on here in Washington, D.C. And then finally, I think the linkage to our Futures Command, which just stood up, is an opportunity to link all of these domains. As we think about multi-domain operations, cyber is a critical part of those domains.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers. Admiral Harder, just a quick follow-up. You mentioned the cyber competition among, including the Coast Guard and Canadians. Just an amazing job with that answer, right? Thank you so much. If the Canadians win, you can expect to be called up for a hearing right afterwards. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent Fort Hood, and for the last about 5 years, I have been refurbishing barracks and building new barracks at Fort Hood. Blessed by the support of this group and MilCon, we're getting that done. But I've had to go through some pretty horrible spaces where soldiers were living. And Admiral, I read your letter that you sent out, and it just was a flashback to all the bad things I'd seen in our barracks at Fort Hood. The stachybotrys mold growing on the walls, and I'm very familiar with that, having been put out of my home for a whole year because of that mold. And it shocked me because Annapolis is one of the prime tourist areas in this area. Everybody that comes up here wants to go at least take a look at Annapolis because it's close to Washington. But in terms, so I asked General Williams about how things were. Did they have those kind of problems? He said to some extent, yes. I recognize that the Air Force was created, your academy was created in my lifetime, but it's still got to be 50 years or something. I don't know. It's got to be a good while ago when it was. We've got to address that. We can't have that kind of working and living environment in our academies. It's just not, it shouldn't happen. And I'm going to be working on that because I think that's extremely important. And some of that stuff is a health issue, a real, legitimate health issue. But in looking at this, I've also done some stuff where you have a historical building and you're going to try to fix it. Holy cow, it costs a lot more money. Now, I don't know whether the Air Force will be designated historical yet, but I know the two schools that you have, everything there is historical buildings. Does that cost you more when you start going in to fix the types of things that you described in your letter? Does that enhance that? And it's all a historical, everybody gets designations, and there are ways to get that waived, at least at the state level. And if you have to deal with that at the federal level and it doubles your cost, maybe we could figure out a way to waive some of that materials replacement at a federal level. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir, I completely do, and I would tell you that we are very respectful of the historic nature of many of our buildings, most of them built between 1900 and 1920. Bancroft Hall being I would argue, the most important because it does house the Brigade of Midshipmen. There are challenges because you're not going to change the concrete structure of it. The roof is a challenge. I don't have the luxury of shutting down Bancroft Hall completely and gutting it because that's the only place we house midshipmen. So it's really important that we do it carefully, plan it. The ability to repair a wing or so a year is optimal. It should be on an every 30-year recapitalization or remodernization for its life, for it to sustain its life. And the way we're funded right now, we don't have that type of money. I have $4 million right now that I'm doing repairs to make sure that the rooms are safe, that there is no mold, and that we're reducing the amount of leaks that sometimes come through an aging roof. But this is part of the challenge, and we won't ever end it because of the nature of where we live, the humidity levels. So we understand that, but we're not planning on going anywhere, so we'll continue to fight for it.
Sir, at Air Force, we are a historical registered site. Our challenge is that all of the facilities at Air Force were all built around the same time, late 50s and early 60s. So they are all aging out at the same time. So we need that same support for the continued recapitalization. To delay sustainment and maintenance to repairs such as dormitories only costs more later as those facilities. And just as Admiral Carter says, none of us have the space that we can afford to empty facilities and then and remodel them. We have to do them in phases over years. So we have two main dormitories. Our Saigon Hall, named after Lance Saigon, is also something that in next year we will be looking to begin a multi-phase program because it houses 2,300 cadets.
Congressman, we're halfway through our 9 barracks. We call it the Cadet Barracks Upgrade Program, or CBUP. And then we have an academic building upgrade program, which we're also executing at this time. We're working very closely. We have a plan, both interim and then midterm and then long-term. With your great support over time, we'll be able to execute that. So we're halfway through where our cadets live, revitalizing, updating all the barracks area, and the academic building that work is just beginning.
You're all creating American heroes, the best of the best. Yep. And we owe it to you. I think we ought to seriously consider taking a look at set aside funding for this capitalization and taking into mind that they've got to continue to operate while they do that, and that allows them to shut down completely. I don't know where we are on something like that, but I'd sure like to talk about it.
Judge, I'm going to follow up on your line of questioning later, and I would point out you make a very solid point, and I'm very concerned about some of the Academy's ability to plan that work. And I'm very happy for having this hearing. I'm going to follow up on that. Ms. McCollum?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm not too far out of what you and Judge Carter were talking about. Admiral Carter, if I remember correctly from our conversation, the Air Force and the Army, the West Point, they each have their own dedicated line item for the academies in the budget line, and the Navy's working to address to make sure you get a line yourself. Now, for the first time, we'll see that in this budget. Am I remembering that conversation correctly?
You are. Currently, my up to 2019 budget goes through the Chief of Naval Personnel. They're our support sponsor for our budget line.
So I think that'll help us do better oversight on that. We had a conversation about the size of the different facilities. Is the Navy facility 338 acres?
Yes, ma'am. It's 338 acres.
And the West Point is over 16,000 acres. And the Air Force Academy is over 18,000 acres? Over 19. Well, we'll get that fixed on the internet. The reason why I bring this up is I'm going to ask about climate change. And the ground zero is the Naval Academy. So as you're talking about all your infrastructure needs, I think this committee needs to be mindful in talking to the Navy and the Pentagon about what they're going to do separate and above what needs to happen with the structures in Annapolis, and how they're going to plan for and implement what needs to happen with climate change. If you would just take a minute, because we'll dig into this deeper and then have more discussions with you at a later date. But we need to talk about, let's use a naval term, sea level rise then, if people aren't all comfortable with climate change on here. So what are some of the things that you want to put on this committee's radar screen? Because that has to be separate. It cannot be competing with what needs to happen with the other facilities on campus.
Thank you, ma'am. And it is an important issue for not just the Naval Academy, but really many of our naval installations that are reside on the Chesapeake. We at the top of the Chesapeake see the significant. In the month of September, we had 16 nuisance floodings in the month alone. So this is a real issue for us. To give you an idea of how we're attacking this, we have a sea level rise.
I'm sorry, Admiral, I didn't hear that. What did you just say?
16 nuisance floodings in September, this past September alone. So we have a sea level rise advisory committee. We've considered how other nations have dealt with sea level rise, especially the Scandinavian countries. We are looking through the science of where the sea level will be 50 years from now and 100 years from now, when we're still going to be on the Severn River. Data shows us that the Naval Academy will see a 1 to 1.5 foot rise by 2050 and 4.3 feet by 2100. There are certain seawalls that we are already planning to raise up to be ready for that. The strategy for how to deal with sea level rise is really pretty simple. You either block it, you move it, or you abandon it. And for the benefit of the committee here, the Naval Academy reclaimed about 55 acres from the Severn River to create our boundary fields in the 1950s. We'd like to not give them back. So this is an important issue for us, and one that will continue, and as Congresswoman McCollum pointed out, this is above and beyond the budgetary things that we have planned. So this is a concern for the Navy and the Naval Academy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to discuss on the curriculum front. Admiral, when you were by the other day, we were talking about over-reliance on technology, the problems we've been having with ship collision. Part of the problem is navigational aids, over-reliance on technology, and the move away from maps, charts, to determine where we're at. And it used to be that when you go on a Navy ship, there was always navigational charts on the bridge. And we moved away from that moved away from celestial navigation being even taught at the Naval Academy. The same thing I would profess with the Air Force. If we didn't have GPS, I wonder if, you know, how these planes are going to land nowadays. And even the Army and the Marine Corps using iPads instead of maps and charts, and I understand they're going back to maps and charts in the field for obvious reasons. You never know when these things are just going to shut down. And this goes on throughout, I would expect, the military enterprise, that we become so used to technology that we forget how we navigate, how we operate without those aids. Could you, are we training these young people to be able to not rely on technology if things go wrong?
Well, I'll start off by saying when you come to the Naval Academy, the first thing you do in plebe summer is you learn how to sail. So there isn't a whole lot of technology involved when you're learning how to sail. You're learning the elements of the seas and the wind. So that's a good baseline for how to transition to how to operate a Navy vessel. We have 18 yard patrol craft at the Naval Academy. They're basic trainers, and it's about seamanship and navigation. But at the end of the day, as you point out, we have to continue to remind our people that one of the most important things to do when you're operating on the seas is to look outside. You can't just look at an instrument or look at an electronic chart. You have to continue to look outside. And I couldn't agree with you more. I personally, in my 37 years of being in the Navy, have experienced loss of connections to the GPS satellites, so it's a real thing. It does happen. We have taken a hard look at our curriculum and what we do in seamanship and navigation. We have not brought back a full celestial navigation course as I took in 1978, but we do touch on that so midshipmen understand the complexity, and the fleet has now brought it back as a standard requirement. So we continue to make sure that we're preparing these young men and women to go out and not just operate high-tech equipment, but be able to do the basics when all that stuff might not work as well as it should.
Thank you.
Sir, for an Air Force Academy cadet, one of the very first things they do is fly in a glider and fly in a sailplane. So there's very little technology involved in a glider, and they're towed up to space and up to the airspace and learn to those basic principles of flight. So from the very beginning, we have a very robust glider program that's one of the most unique in the world. Our cadets, our junior and senior cadets, teach the first year cadets the soaring program. And we know consistently those cadets that are instructors in our glider program, which speaks directly to your point, those instructors perform remarkably well in pilot training and beyond when they go out and join the force. So, and I will add, sir, that prior to being the superintendent at the Academy, I was deployed to the Middle East and conducting at the operational level operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. And very much handled every day the training and the recognition that we always needed to know that at any moment some element of our technology would not be available. And so the forces, all forces train that way operationally, and all forces function that way, recognizing that at times we may lose that technology.
In the land dimension, Congressman, it's very important that they understand the tenacity and the grit and determination it requires to win in that dimension. And so from day one, as new cadets or plebes, they're on their feet a lot, and they're walking up and down hills, and they don't have any technology with them. In their sophomore year, their yearling year, if you will, they get exposed to more of the military skills required of being a logistician or an infantryman or an artilleryman. I will tell you, as an artilleryman, that's one of the things we teach, is that do not rely on the technology. You have to understand the charts and darts, if you will. What are the physics of how you make a round go from point A to point B? And not only in the summer as a practitioner, but also in the classroom. Our Department of Military Instruction does a great job of teaching the history, and they talk about leaders of past and the operational environments they had to dominate and win in the past. And these are the same immutable characteristics of our current operating environment. So it's important that they understand the toughness, the grit, and determination to fight and win in those environments.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I think the first thing our adversaries will do, if in case we get into a real war, is you're not going to have the technology you think you're going to have. So I Appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm going to turn to Ms. Capter in a moment. Would simply note that Mr. Ryan, who cannot be with us today, has 3 questions for the record. And gentlemen, if you could have those answered for us, I'd appreciate it. 2 of them deal with dietary habits in the food environment. I must tell you, I have a special interest too. As I describe my life, when I'm in Indiana, I eat happy food. When I am here with my wife, I eat healthy. Ms. Capter?
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, and I apologize for being late. I had another committee I was required to be at. We thank you for your service to our country and for shaping the next generation. I was very interested in your testimony. You used the word character, developing character. I'd like to ask a whole lot of questions about that, but in my brief time, let me just say I am interested in each of the academies, how many of those who are being educated ultimately move into a medical profession, either as a doctor or a physician assistant. Do you have those numbers available, or do you have a sense of that?
At the Naval Academy, it's roughly 12 of our 1,000 graduates go into the Navy Naval Medical Corps, which supports the Navy and the Marine Corps, and the largest enlisted force of any rating for the United States Navy.
12 in each?
12 per year.
Per year.
Ma'am, for West Point, we'll graduate in this class, 20 will be doctors, medical doctors, and the average is about 20 from year to year is our average.
Thank you.
And ma'am, we are right between those two, typically 15 to 18.
Do you think that's too low a number?
I will just answer for the Naval Academy. We take a look at this, and of course, we fill the requirements that are given to us by Higher Navy through the Chief of Naval Personnel. It is one of the few communities that is not a direct warfighting role that we do provide graduates. But we find that our graduates that go into the doctor roles from the Naval Academy have a very high retention rate and do very well. So I'm happy that we provide some, and I think personally this is, my view is the number's about right.
Well, I would ask this, if you could, to think about this question and provide for the record a reply. The U.S. military finished 2018 with the highest suicide rate among active duty personnel in at least 6 years. We lost 321, including the Admiral of the Fifth Fleet, whom we had met in Tampa not long ago. In our society, if we look at what is going on, with the mass murders from coast to coast, the majority of those who are perpetrating these crimes are young people who have severe mental issues that have not been sufficiently addressed. I've been struggling myself with what do we do as a country, and one of the facts I have learned is that we are about 100,000 doctors short in our country of those who can diagnose either at the pediatric level or at the adult level, and we have time bombs just waiting to go off all over this country. So being 100,000 physicians short, I say to myself, is there a way we can invent a program to produce more doctors who would have these skills? We learned from Special Forces that when they embedded behavioral specialists, not necessarily doctors, but behavioral specialists in units, the suicide rate went down to the military average. The average isn't good, but in any case. So I thought to myself, how do we produce doctors in this field? Could there be a combined public program that links to the private sector? I don't know if the military could have a role in that, but my goodness, we need more people adequately qualified. I can guarantee you that at the veterans, when folks come home and they rotate out and they come to our clinics and so forth, we don't have enough personnel in our veterans hospitals and clinics to accommodate those who are demonstrating a much higher level of suicide than in past generations. So I wanted to ask you, have you ever given any thought to this? Is there some way that we could fund additional students who could go on in the medical fields that our society so desperately needs, even if we could create a program that would partly be funded by their service to the country, both militarily and on the civilian side when they would rotate out perhaps? Have you ever given any thought to this?
Ma'am, the numbers of Naval Academy ensigns that go into the Medical Corps is a very small percentage of the Navy doctors that are produced for the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps. The great majority of them are produced through an officer candidate school program that's specifically designated to take those civilians that are already in medical school or have finished medical school and then transition to the Navy. It's also one of the few ranks where you can come in after being a full-fledged doctor in whatever your specialty is and come in at a mid-grade level. So this is a Navy challenge more than a Naval Academy challenge. However, to your point, I would submit that as great as our young men and women are, they are not immune from these challenges. We have a Midshipman Development Center which is specifically designed to help midshipmen with mental health, and our appointments are full. I've seen the appointment level triple over my 5 years as superintendent, and as much as that might sound like it maybe not necessarily a good thing, what I would tell you is the stigma of going to see somebody and say, I'm having a bad day, is not there at the Naval Academy. I think I could say on behalf of all of our programs here, it's a busy time when you're a midshipman or a cadet. There's not a lot of time to get away and just take a couple days off. So it's a tough program. The Midshipman Development Center is a great need for us and helps build the resiliency of our midshipmen.
Ma'am, I'd like to add that
Yes.
as the Navy, as Admiral Carter mentioned, we are also responsive to the needs of the Air Force, but we are one source of the commissioned officers that come into the United States Air Force. So the Reserve Officer Training Corps, as well as our OTS, or Officer Training School, they provide commissioned officers in similar way to that the Navy does. Commissioned officers have a way of getting into the United States Air Force through other universities. So our physicians, our cadets that graduate and go to medical school are one part of the entire picture for the rest of the Air Force, for those that are going to medical school. And similar to Navy, we all have programs that are very robust in cadet counseling that are available to the cadets. There's very much a network of care that surrounds them to where they can go if they just need to talk to somebody, if they just need to get away for a moment, if they try to determine if they have a larger problem. So we have a counseling center, we have family life counselors, we have chaplains that are available, a consistent network of care that is around the cadets.
General, have you ever had cadets who develop mental illness onsets in the academy?
Yes, ma'am, we have over time. We have had cadets that have developed mental illness at the academy, and in addition to our counseling center, we have medical professionals that are mental health professionals that are able to provide the health and care of those cadets through the time.
Is there any way each of you could estimate for the record, because most of these illnesses onset in the late teens and 20s, what percentage of those who are admitted do develop these conditions, and what happens to them? Are they discharged then? And if they're discharged, are they discharged to care, or are they just discharged to the street?
Ma'am, I'll continue to answer. I'll have to get for the record the numbers of those that we have had, but we have a number of ways that we care for young men and women that we provide that care to them directly. And they have ways that they can take time away from the academy. We have an opportunity for them to take 6 months away or a year away so that they can go and heal and get the care that they need and then return to the academy. So that's one avenue that they have to receive the care.
General, thank you.
Congressman, we have the same similar construct, the medical leave of absence. If we find a cadet over their 4 years who develop some sort of mental health and need help, they can leave the academy. I'm the one that authorizes them to leave, and if they need to stay longer, they will stay longer so they can get that care. But like my teammates here, while they're at West Point, we have a host of professionals that can help them, whether it be our Center for Enhancement. We're talking about resilience. How do you increase or ensure that mental and spiritual and physical resilience is maintained over our 47-month experience? So we have lots of coaches. We have a Center for Enhanced Performance. We have a Cadet Professional Development Center. We have chaplains, as others have mentioned. We have military family life counselors. So there is a network of folks who are standing by to nurture and coach and make sure the cadets graduate in their 47-month experience.
Have the academies experienced any suicides this year or in prior years?
We have not had one this year. We have had, on occasion, suicides in past year. They're rare, but we have. And to answer your question for the record, I don't have the exact numbers of those that developmental illness and the details of how we handle them, so I'd like to provide that separately, ma'am.
Thank you. General, did you wish to say something?
Ma'am, I was going to say, we have not had any suicides in the past few years. We have had cadets with suicide ideations that we provide care for and allow them to receive mental health support.
General?
West Point, we've had no suicides this year, but we've had some in the past, ma'am.
All right, well, I'm not going to leave anybody who has a budget off the hook. We need doctors in this country. We've needed them for a long time. We have to figure out how to train them and get them out serving both in the military and in civilian society. I hope you'll give that some consideration as you plan your programming for next year, and we'll love to hear from you for the record on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Ms. Womack? Ms. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Calvert. Thanks to all of you for being here today. It's a privilege. I apologize for having run late. I was at another committee meeting too, so we all have lots of duties around here. Admiral Carter, I was curious, the Naval Academy, like my home in Pinellas County, Florida, is on the front lines of climate change, as you addressed earlier. Like my district, you're surrounded by water. And when there is flooding, the water often has nowhere to go. So I was wondering, what is the Naval Academy doing to respond to rising sea level and increased flooding?
So thank you for the question. We have put together a committee to go after and study sea level rise at the Naval Academy. As I had mentioned earlier, we predict that sea level rise will go up a foot to 1.5 feet by 2050 and 4.3 feet by 2100. So this is something that being right on the Severn River, we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to have to build funding to support how we protect the Naval Academy from the rising sea level. The month of September was the highest number of nuisance floodings we'd seen in our history, 16 in the month of September alone. So this is a challenge, but of course we are the Navy. We do live by and operate by the sea, so we're going to have to learn how to do this. The Naval Academy's not planning on moving. We'll change our very small 338-acre campus somewhat if we need to, but this is a real issue for us, and there will be some cost as to how we maintain and sustain the Naval Academy in years going forward.
Right. Thank you, Admiral. And this is for any one of the panelists. The service academies rival any university in the country in terms of academic achievement, certainly. However, unlike other universities, the service academies have another purpose, training high-quality officers and members of our armed forces. Can you highlight some of the unique programs or requirements placed on cadets or midshipmen and some of the challenges this causes in maintaining high academic achievement?
Well, I'll make a couple of key points. One that's same for all of us that makes us unique from any other college university. We're a 4-year program. So there really isn't a 5 or a 6-year program. You come to the Naval Academy, you're intended to graduate in 4 years. We're now a developmental program, meaning that if you're good enough to get into the Naval Academy, we have every expectation that if you do the standard and you meet the standard, which is moral, mental, and physical, that you will be prepared as a whole person ready to lead and graduate. We have seen some remarkable numbers and achievement and academic success. Long ago, when I was a midshipman, our attrition rate usually was around 30%, easily 10% overall due to just academic deficiency. We developed a Center for Academic Excellence, a different place for tutoring, as well as the extra instruction that is given by our world-class faculty. And we've now reduced academic attrition, non-voluntary, at the Naval Academy to less than 1.5% over the last few years. So what that equates to is we're now sitting at about 90% graduation rates. And if I could just put out a really great statistic about the Naval Academy, for any schools in our country that have more than 50% of their academic majors are STEM-based, that have more than 100 students, the Naval Academy's had the highest graduation rate now going back 6 years. So we're very proud of that, and I think those are some of the things that make us unique and make us a unique challenge. One other very interesting statistic, I know all three of us have very high accept rates, or in higher academia known as yield, meaning the number of freshmen that say yes to your offer. The Naval Academy is #1 in the country at 88% over the last 2 years. 88% of prospective students had said yes to a Naval Academy offer.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I think I'll use an example that we have cadets who designed and built satellites. And right now they're controlling a satellite that passes over the Academy every 90 minutes in our Satellite Operations Center. They have another one that we're going to launch soon, and then a third one that's ready. We don't have a rocket for it yet. We don't have a space on that. And that'll be 3 satellites. There are countries that don't have 3 satellites on orbit. But the same cadets that designed and built and operate that satellite, just as the other 2 academies, are also participating in a rigorous military developmental program where they are learning leadership principles through those years. And they're also, in many cases, athletes that are on some of the varsity teams, or they are also participating in some athletic program. So regardless of the depth that they're in some element of the curriculum, we expect them to participate in all elements of the military, the academic, and the athletic parts of the program, all underpinned by the character development that's required of all of the cadets.
Thank you, Congressman. I think what makes us unique is first and foremost our code, the idea of character. We have the 4 pillars that I mentioned, the academic, military, physical, but character is what binds us. That's what makes the academies, all of us, unique. We all have codes, and our young men and women at the end of their sophomore year, right before they begin their junior year, have to affirm. They essentially join our services at the start of their junior year. What also makes us unique is our requirement to be a warrior. That you have to be, we have a saying that every cadet is an athlete. And whether you compete at the Division I level, and we have 1,000, a quarter of our cadets participate at the Division I level at West Point. I think the others are close, the same as well. And then also I would say the military training that we do in the summer is very, very unique. Our cadets get to jump out of airplanes, they get to assault out of helicopters, they get to walk a lot, they get to carry heavy things on their back and learn how to persevere. And they learn a lot in that 47-month experience. They are fundamentally different at 47 months over that period of challenging experience. They learn a lot about themselves, and they grow in ways that they never thought when they came into the United States Military Academy.
Thank you all very much, and appreciate your service to our country.
Mr. Womack.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One on cadet life. The organizations, the institutions that are before us today have a kind of a time-honored, interesting cadet life mix, unlike any other institution of higher learning, where there are requirements across the spectrum, the mental, the physical, the military component. How have these, how has the cadet life experience changed over time recently, and is it constantly under evaluation to make sure that it is not a discriminator to get the best and brightest to come to the institution, but can't be watered down so that we're not producing the highest quality junior officer that kind of separates us from the rest of our global peers?
Sir, I'll say that as a 1985 graduate of the Academy, when I look at the Academy now today that I stepped into 32 years later, the level of sophistication is truly unbelievable. You know, I've mentioned our research and some of our other programs that the cadets are involved in, but the level of sophistication and the depth and the breadth of the program. Cadets are involved in so many different clubs and so many different elements of the curriculum and so many different aspects of athleticism that broad base that I see that the cadets experience, it really truly is remarkable. But you mentioned about the best and brightest. As I'm with these young men and women, I think it's an important point to realize that we talk about all those elements and our 4 elements and our military and all as we've all laid out. That's what they asked for. That's what they want, and they consistently revel in the fact that yes, they're on an intercollegiate team and they're taking a difficult major and they're a squadron commander, but they want to do something else in some other part of the academy. That's the kind of young men and women that we have that are trying to do more and more.
Admiral?
Sir, I would echo the same things that my colleague Jay just said. What's lost on a lot of folks is what happens to midshipmen and cadets after the academic year. The summer program for us is broken into 4 distinct blocks, 3 principal ones that are about a month long and a shorter block 0. And again, I go back to my time when I was a Naval Academy midshipman from 1977 to 81. I might go on one summer event, maybe go do a cruise on a Navy vessel, be part of a leadership program. Our midshipmen are typically involved in 2, sometimes 3 of the blocks, doing everything from taking more classes, even though they may not need to do a professional development element, whether it be go operate with a Navy SEAL unit, be on a ship or a submarine, get exposed to all the elements of the Navy and the Marine Corps. So they're engaged in this development to become a professional year-round. And I think the other thing that's very different, and I think we'd all agree we've been talking about, is just the demographics of who is in the Brigade of Midshipmen. We have shifted significantly. We're not a perfect cross-section of what is society in the United States today in terms of demographics, but we're getting closer. And again, that's thanks to you and your staffs that are picking not just the best and brightest, but the most representative of our United States. So it's a much, much different place, even just in even the last 5 to 10 years at the Naval Academy.
So your sons and daughters that you ask us to look after for 47 months, we ask you to evaluate their academic potential, their leadership potential, and their physical potential. And we look at that over that 47 months. So to your question, it's important to continue to evaluate and reassess what's needed. I will speak in the land domain in terms of being a leader in ground combat operations. I mean, we need folks that are Marshall scholars and Truman scholars, but are also can dominate in the physical and show the true grit, tenacity, and determination to dominate and win in those sorts of environments. So the scholar, athlete, warrior is very important. And I think it requires a constant reevaluation over time as our environment changes. Our environment is complex, it's ambiguous, you don't get a lot of sleep, and it's tough. So your young men and women that come here, they learn that at all of our academies, and they certainly learn it at West Point to be leaders of character in this space.
Pete, I've got just one last question, and then I'm finished. A couple of weeks ago, I have a policy in my staff that whenever we have a notification that a young man or a young woman from my district is going to be going to a service academy, that I get the privilege of being able to contact that individual before the academy does and make the notification. I highly recommend that to all of my colleagues. If you're not doing that, you should be doing that. You will not find any greater joy than that. So a couple of weeks ago, I called Isaiah Ballou at Greenwood High School in Arkansas, in my district. I've been working with this kid now for a number of years. And it just so happens he wanted to go to the Naval Academy. It was #1 choice, and that's where he's had his heart set since I've known him. And I called him to tell him about this appointment. And he broke down on the phone. And it took him a while to regain his composure, and he apologized to me. And after talking to the young man, then I always ask them if they want me to contact their parents. Some do, some would like for me to make the notification. So he told me to call his mom. And I called his mom, and there was dead silence. And she too had to regain her composure. Now, I'm not saying for a minute that when you pick the university, calls a young man and says, hey, or sends him a letter, you're going to be admitted to our school, that there's not a kind of an emotional connection there. But only in the case of the military academies, and it's not just Navy. I picked Navy because it's recent, but it's Air Force, it's West Point, it's Merchant Marine, it's even the Coast Guard Academy. There's something about those that goes right to the heart and soul of who we are as a country, unlike any other thing. And so I'm going to give each one of the gentlemen an opportunity. I know you have your own stories, but this is probably my layup question of the day for you, and that is, how does that make you feel as the superintendent of an academic and military institution that gets such a response from the people that we're sending to you.
Sir, thank you for sharing that story, and we get that it's an emotional thing when somebody is given a seat in a freshman class at any of our service academies. What's remarkable to me, as I've been now in my 5th admissions cycle at the Naval Academy, is not just the quality of who we get, the diversity, and not just in the the demographics. 11% first-generation American, 13% first in their family to ever attend college. We all understand how impactful that is. It might surprise people to know that 1 in 5 of our midshipmen that show up are fluent in another language. So these are just some of the attributes. Oh, and 93% of them are already varsity letter winners in their high school. And there are 2 significant days in the life of a 4-year, 47-month journey. And I think the induction day, that day that they come in as a civilian and put on a uniform for the first time, learn how to salute, stand at attention, and take an oath as a midshipman, it's remarkably emotional. Most parents go to that now. And then, of course, graduation, which you can imagine when you see the hats get thrown in the air, it's the end of their midshipman journey, but the beginning of their career. So I say thank you for sharing that story and reminding us why we do what we do and why it's so important.
If I could accept that as an answer for the panel, so we can move on, that would be terrific. Ms. Captor, do you have anything else?
I did have one small question, Mr. Chairman. Did anyone ask about the aircraft-related crashes today?
No.
If not, I would ask this question, General. Aircraft-related crashes are up nearly 40% since 2013. And my question is, have budgets driven the academies to substitute simulated virtual computer training rather than real-world training? Is that the reason for these crashes?
Ma'am, my role at the Air Force Academy is to inspire and to begin to teach these young men and women to take on careers as operational aviators in the United States Air Force. So we have a glider program, we have a parachute training program, and we also have T-53s, which is the military version of a low-wing general aviation small single-engine propeller aircraft. And so I use those 3 elements to introduce the cadets into aviation. We supplement all of that with training devices that include the simulators, but also now we have ones that include the virtual reality, and we're showing outstanding results where cadets that were able to solo in a certain amount of time in a glider, we can reduce that amount of time by, in some cases, 5 or 10% because of their performance after they've used the virtual reality goggles. So budgets have not driven us to use those elements at the Air Force Academy. Those have been a real opportunity for us. In many cases, someone puts on a virtual reality goggle and they can perform a function in the air 20 times with those goggles on, when if they were in the air, they'd only be able to do it 1 time.
What do you attribute, sir, the crashes?
Ma'am, as an aviator myself, traditionally the crashes that we attribute to, they always come from various reasons. There's maintenance in aircraft, but there's also training that the airmen have and continued. So without review of the specific crashes that you're talking about, ma'am, but it's always of various reasons for crashes in aviation.
We have, and I'll put this in the record, destroyers colliding with commercial vessels in the Western Pacific, a Harriet jump jet crashed in Djibouti, and all the services are continually experiencing negligent discharges from weapons.
We can have that answered for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chris? I have 3 areas I'd like to cover before we adjourn. And gentlemen, the first deals with facilities, sustainment, restoration, and for the Military Academy at West Point. The Training and Doctrine Command works with the Academy to ensure that funding is included in out-year budgeting for this account for projects for the Academy. And that funding would be assured you so that you can plan for those out years, barring some major unforeseen circumstance. Am I basically correct? Just, I'm on the right track. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would say, it wouldn't be training and doctrine command. It would be my Army leadership that would work the FSRM.
I'm sorry. I
Yes.
didn't hear. Yes. I'm completely confused now. Let me put it another way. The Academy for Facility Sustainment, Restoration, Maintenance, you're in the overall budget request.
That's right,
You're
Chairman.
part of that budget.
That's right, Mr. Chair.
You also can anticipate in the POM the next 4 years, barring, again, some significant change. So that
That's
you
right,
can
Mr. Chair.
plan your work when we finish our appropriations, you know what
Yes,
you're
sir.
going to get. Okay.
Yes, sir.
For the Naval Academy, my understanding is that as of this moment, there is no major command to ensure that type of predictability, both for a current fiscal year or the next 4. Although literally yesterday, the Secretary of the Navy announced plans to create a 3-star position to work to ensure that each of the major naval educational institutions, yourself, I believe, the War College and the Naval Postgraduate, would be in a similar situation that West Point is in today, where there is predictability for the current fiscal year and the out years.
That's correct.
Okay. For the Air Force, my understanding is that the Air Force Installations Management Support Center budgets for the activities, but that they are centrally controlled and no installation commander, including yourself, would know in advance for sure in a fiscal year how much money you're going to get. Is that basically correct, General?
Sir, one correction I would make is that in some cases, I do get money that I know for sure that I will get some FSRM, but then in others, in other projects, I have to wait and see if it will be funded.
And when you say for some of it, is that within the facility sustainment account?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are some that I get funded, and then some that are not funded that I have to wait and see for funding later.
The request for 19 was $174.2 million. Just for perspective, and if you have a ballpark figure, what percentage of that money could you count on in the current year, 19?
Sir, I think I'll have to get that to you for record, so
If you
to understand
could.
for 19, yes, sir.
And the follow-up question then would be,
Because you want specifically within FSRM, yes, sir?
I'm sorry,
You want specifically within FSRM?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
but that you would not necessarily know what that figure would be, either the portion you know you're going to get, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, sir, I
The
do
rest
know.
of it for the out years.
Right, for the out years, I don't know that, yes, sir. Sir, we did talk to your staff a little bit that there is an amount that I know I still need for 19 and for 20. So I do know where my shortfall is for 19 and for 20.
Could I ask, Admiral, first of all, with the potential position being created, and again, it was announced yesterday, we'll be receiving the 20 budget about March 18th. Would you anticipate your circumstances would change with the fiscal year budget request for 20? So that, again, you'd be in a more comparable situation such as West Point where you would know for 20 and you'd have a fairly accurate prediction for the next 4 years. Do you anticipate that's going to happen to you in 20?
Sir, I'm aware of the recommendations by the Secretary to stand up a 3-star position for the Chief of Naval Operations staff. I think it'll be a number of months before that position is created and flag levels are probably adjusted.
I thought the Navy does stuff like that.
Yes, sir. So I think our budget line for our operations and maintenance budget will go the same method through the Chief of Naval Personnel as you described. I do want to make one adjustment to your earlier comment. My restoration and sustainment funding for the installation actually comes through Naval Facilities Command, who works for Chief of Naval Installations Command. So that's a separate operating budget line that supports that part of the Naval Academy. The other operations budget that I testified to earlier was to support civilian pay, ship maintenance, ship control, and midshipman travel, and some of those things.
And it would be my anticipation if you had if you had greater certainty for the current fiscal year and then those follow-on years, it would facilitate some of the investments you've got to make so you can plan to a greater degree.
Yes, sir. I'm very optimistic about this plan that the Secretary put forth yesterday. I think it will help support our needs in having a direct representative at the budgeting table to speak for what we call the flagship institutions, the Naval War College, the Naval Academy, and the Naval Postgraduate School.
General Silveria, the Navy made the announcement literally yesterday. At this point, I'm not aware that the Air Force is in a position to, if you would, emulate the way the Army budgets for West Point. Just your opinion, I'm assuming, from a budgetary standpoint, and again, renovations, and again, you've got a problem where everything's kind of the same age. It would facilitate and make it more effective for you and efficient if there was more dependability in that budgeting sequence.
Sir, I think there would be some possibility that it would probably be a little more efficient, but I have to tell you that my secretary and my chief and my manpower and readiness secretary of the Air Force are directly involved and know my needs consistently. I mean, they're working on some of the projects and discussing them openly with me directly. So I feel well supported and that they're aware of those facility sustainment monies that we need.
I don't doubt they're aware of your needs, and I don't doubt their intent, knowing both individuals. But if you had it in the budget, that it was an identifiable amount and you could plan, I assume there would be some improvement in your circumstances.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. If it was a separate budget like that, yes, sir, and it wasn't through another command as we all have, yes, sir, it would be much more efficient.
We'd be delighted as we work on we're done at 19, obviously, but with the budget submissions in 20 not knowing exactly what is going to happen, would suggest on behalf of the subcommittee, would love to work with the services to make sure that predictability is forthcoming. I really think that'd be a good idea. Second area is the endowments. We've all gone to schools. We're all proud of our schools, maybe not so proud, depends. You all have endowments from your graduates, and my understanding is in ballpark average at West Point it's about 33 million. Air Force, because they're more frugal, it's about 12 million, obviously different circumstance, and Annapolis is about 26 million. I must tell you, because you're federal facilities, I understand the impulse of graduates to support their universities. I'm concerned that someone who does your budgets, not yourselves, are figuring that your graduates are going to fill part of the hole that we as a government ought to be paying for. Just
Sir, I think
very briefly, do you end up in the middle of the year and you're filling holes with the endowments? Do you have any sense there's some assumptions, well, they've got an endowment and they can take care of this themselves? And I don't want to put anybody on a spot here, but, and I'm not opposed to the endowment and I'm not opposed to the investment. I'm just, you're running federal facilities here.
Mr. Chair, you fund us to be able to do our core mission, which is to graduate roughly 1,000 cadets every year. This endowment, we all have different pieces of it are what we call margin of excellence in that, and they add on to. I create a needs statement that would be nice to have, but you fund us to what we need to graduate, to commission a second lieutenant, that they have a 4-year degree and move on. I meet my core requirements of what you provide us. And this endowment provides addition, margin of excellence kind of quality. It allows us to compete with other Tier 1 institutions. There's enrichment done. They enable enrichment in our academic programs. That's an example of what they're able to do on travel. And they also do some construction as well.
Okay. And I assume that's true for the other two?
Yes, sir, very, very much true.
I just want to make sure we're not shifting burdens here. The final question I have is on retentions, and I do not know if the academies track, I do not know if the individual departments track, but my understanding is you become an officer in a number of ways. One is you attend the academy's incredible education. You may end up not being so fortunate in going to the University of Southern California and participate, oh, I'm sorry. My son's a graduate, I can make fun. And do ROTC. You can also go to Officer Candidate School. Are there any matrix as far as 5 years out? If I've done ROTC, if I've done Officer Candidate, I've done Academy, about the same percentages, different percentages of people as far as retention and continuing in the military? I'm just curious.
Sir, we track our Naval Academy graduates as alumni and follow their career path in detail. We do comparison data to ROTC and OCS. Our last look at those categories is all three were retaining at slightly higher levels. The Naval Academy a little more so, much deeper into a career. So again, rough numbers in recent data is 90% of Naval Academy graduates are still serving at the 5-year point, which is usually generally just getting to their first commitment, about 50% at the 10-year point, and about 1/3 at the 20-year point. And if you look at the naval flag ranks, especially as you get to the 4-star level, we're near 85 to 90% of the 4 stars are Naval Academy graduates.
Do you know how that compares to the other two paths by chance, Admiral?
I'm sorry, sir, how they?
ROTC or Officer Candidate, do you know how that might compare with those two paths?
So they're a little bit less. I think at the 5-year point, they're probably almost exactly the same. And this is only for the unrestricted line community. So for ships, surface warfare, submarine warfare, aviation, Navy SEAL, EOD, and elements within the Marine Corps, because that's where most of our graduates go. So Officer Candidate School produces the vast majority of the support officer corps, medical, dental, legal, chaplains, public affairs, and that sort of thing. So that's not included in that comparative data. So this is in the what we call the unrestricted line warfare communities. So part of this is to make sure that we're doing the right things right, and that our graduates, who obviously we put a tremendous investment in, are not just being retained, but they're being promoted and they're doing well.
Mr. Chairman, I need to take that for the record. I know that my senior Army leadership is very concerned in this space about the return on investment in terms of the different commissioning sources. As I mentioned, West Point commissions around, on or about 1,000 second lieutenants a year. The ROTC around 6,000, and the OCS slightly south. Officer Candidate School slightly south of 1,000 each year. But I need to come back to you and take that for the record in terms of stay time.
So I'd also like to take that for the record for the exact numbers, but I do know a sense that the retention rate overall over years is roughly the same, but the promotion rates tend to be better for our Air Force Academy grads than the other commissioning sources. And I know that among our senior officers, among our general officers, similar to the Navy, there is a higher percentage, a disproportionate percentage of those that achieve our senior general officer ranks.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Gentlemen, you have anything? If not, thank you very much, one, for your service, again, changing your schedules, and for your testimony today. Look forward to working with you. We're adjourned.